A lucky mechanic like you does not deserve to be chairman. A cruel laugh rang out in the courtroom. Charles Beaumont presented a fake contract, claiming Darnell's control ended because his adopted daughter's trust fund was illegal. They wanted to steal Blue Anchor by attacking the bond between Darnell and his daughter across color lines. Standing in the Savannah federal court overlooking a stormy river, Darnell only wanted to protect his daughter's honor. This legal battle was full of traps, fake papers, threatened witnesses, and being shut out by the rich. Can the truth from a mechanic locker 16 years ago smash this cruel plan? But to understand how a mechanic could stand so calm in that storm, we need to go back 3 months. It was 6:15 in the morning at Pier 4, Port of Savannah. Fog sat low over the water. Darnell Pierce knelt beside a massive crankshaft, his $45 work jacket stained with grease. The jacket had a torn pocket. He never asked anyone to fix it. Frank, an old mechanic with silver stubble, handed him a wrench. "You still eat that same sandwich every morning," Frank said. Darnell smiled and took a bite of his $3.50 deli sandwich. The bread was a little stale. He did not care. Diesel fumes mixed with brine in the cold air. A crane groaned somewhere behind them, its cable clicking against steel. Workers nodded at Darnell as they passed. Nobody bowed. Nobody flattered him. They just trusted him, the way you trust a man who shows up every single day. A container ship groaned against its ropes nearby. The hull creaked with every gentle wave. Gulls screamed overhead, circling low over crates stacked 3 stories high. Darnell tightened a bolt with slow, careful turns. His fingers knew this engine the way other men knew their own name. He had learned crankshafts before he learned to drive a car. Frank leaned against the container, sipping coffee from a dented thermos. "Your daddy taught you well," he said. "He taught me one thing," Darnell answered. "Machines don't lie. People sometimes do." Frank chuckled, the sound rough like gravel. He did not ask what Darnell meant. He never had to. 22 floors above the dock, the executive suite of Blue Anchor Logistics looked nothing like this world. Marble floors, cold air conditioning, men in tailored suits who had never touched a wrench in their lives. Thick glass separated their offices from the wind and salt outside. The carpet up there smelled like nothing at all, scrubbed clean of anything real. Darnell owned that tower. His company moved cargo worth over $1 billion a year. Yet here he was, on his knees, oil under his fingernails. His son, Tristan, walked onto the dock holding a tablet. "Shipping numbers are up 14.2% this quarter, Dad," he said. Darnell wiped his hands on a rag. "Numbers don't run a port, son. People do." Tristan smiled, but something in his eyes looked tired. "The board doesn't see it that way." Darnell shrugged. He had heard the whispers before. The executives upstairs called him the lucky mechanic. They said he got rich by accident, not by mind. They forgot who built the company from a single rusted tugboat. For 3 months now, closed-door meetings had been happening on the 22nd floor. Darnell was never invited. Would this quiet morning last, while men in suits planned something behind locked doors? Down at the far end of the pier, a fishing boat chugged out toward open water. Its engine sputtered twice before catching a steady rhythm. Darnell watched it go, thinking about nothing in particular. Moments like this rarely lasted. He had learned that lesson the hard way more than once in his life. Still, he tried to hold onto the calm a little longer, letting the salt breeze settle something restless in his chest. At 1:30 that afternoon, a sealed envelope landed on Darnell's desk. His secretary looked nervous handing it to him. Inside was a formal audit notice from Charles Beaumont, the company's chief financial officer. It demanded immediate review of a monthly payment of $4,217.83. That payment went into a trust fund for Darnell's daughter, Serafina. Beaumont called it an improper drain on shareholder assets. 10 minutes later, Beaumont walked into Darnell's office without knocking. His leather shoes clicked hard on the floor. A gold watch flashed on his wrist. "You built sympathy points off that girl for years," Beaumont said, tapping the folder. "Time to answer for it." Darnell's jaw tightened. A vein pulsed once at his temple. He kept his voice low. "Watch how you talk about my daughter." Beaumont smiled without warmth. "Careful, Darnell. One phone call, and the whole story about her past comes out. Every ugly piece of it." Darnell's chest tightened, heat rising up his neck. "You don't know the first thing about her story." "I know enough," Beaumont said. "Enough to make good headlines." He left the folder on the desk and walked out, whistling. The sound echoed down the hallway long after his footsteps faded. Darnell sat frozen for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Outside his window, gray clouds rolled in low over the harbor. What exactly did Beaumont think he had, strong enough to destroy Serafina's whole life? That night, Darnell sat alone in his office. The building was empty. Rain tapped softly against the window glass. He rolled an old brass key between his fingers. Locker number 308. The metal was worn smooth from 16 years of touching it. He thought about Serafina at 8 years old, shaking under the old pier, holding a torn teddy bear with one missing eye. Rain had soaked her thin jacket that night. Her lips had been blue from the cold. She had not cried, not once, not even when he asked her name. He could not let reporters drag that memory through the mud. Not for money, not for a chairman's title. He thought of her now, 24 years old, a sharp young lawyer with her mother's stubborn chin. She had built her whole career proving she belonged somewhere. He would not let one greedy man erase that. Outside his window, thunder rolled low across the harbor. A ship's horn answered it, deep and mournful. The next morning, Darnell called Beaumont's office directly. "I'll offer $2.5 million personally to settle this quietly," he said. "Leave my daughter's name out of it." There was a pause on the line. Then Beaumont laughed. "That's not what I want, Darnell. I want the whole company." Darnell set the phone down slowly. His hand did not shake, but his stomach turned cold. Would his willingness to sacrifice everything only make him look weaker to a predator like Beaumont? Later that week, Darnell drove out to a small wooden house near the river. Marcus Vance, the retired harbor master, answered the door in a faded flannel shirt. "Been wondering when you'd show up," Marcus said, pouring 2 cups of hot tea. Marcus had trained Darnell 20 years earlier, back when Darnell was just a 19-year-old deckhand, with torn gloves and big dreams. He remembered Marcus teaching him to read a storm just by watching the water. The old house smelled like cedar smoke and strong tea. A wood stove crackled in the corner, warming the small kitchen against the evening chill. "They're coming after Sarah," Darnell said quietly, using her past like a weapon. Marcus set his cup down hard enough to rattle the saucer. His weathered face tightened. That girl survived things most grown men couldn't. "And they want to use it against her?" "Beaumont wants the whole company," Darnell said. "He's not going to stop." Marcus set down an old leather registry book, its pages yellow and soft. "You remember what you promised the Union back when you signed the founding charter?" Darnell frowned. "That was 15 years ago. I barely remember the wording." Marcus opened to a marked page. "There's a clause in there, Darnell, when you probably forgot writing. I witnessed it myself." He slid a photocopy across the table. Darnell's eyes moved slowly over the faded print. "You can't survive a storm by turning your back to it," Marcus said. "You have to be the anchor." Darnell folded the photocopy carefully and slid it into his jacket pocket. Outside, rain kept tapping against the tin roof, steady as a heartbeat. "Thank you," Darnell said quietly, standing to leave. "I mean it, Marcus." The old man waved a weathered hand. "Just go protect your family, son. That's thanks enough for me." What hidden clause in that old book could flip this entire legal fight? At 9 the next morning, Darnell walked into an emergency board meeting on the top floor. He wore a stiff gray suit, but his jaw still looked like a man used to hard labor. 12 executives sat around a long glass table. Beaumont stood at the head, arms crossed, smiling like a man who already won. Darnell dropped Marcus's old registry book onto the table with a loud thud. "You can try to take my company," Darnell said, his voice steady, "but you will not touch my daughter's honor." Beaumont's smile faltered for half a second. "This is a business matter. Pierce, not sentiment. Everything Blue Anchor is, Darnell said, started with sentiment. With people who trusted me when I had nothing. He turned and walked out of the room, leaving stunned silence behind him. What kind of retaliation would this bold move trigger from Beaumont's alliance? Within days, Darnell's security badge stopped working at Gate 9. He stood outside in the rain, unable to enter his own building. A young guard shrugged apologetically. System says your access got revoked this morning, sir. I don't make the rules. Darnell stared up at the glass tower he had built from nothing. Rain ran down his collar, cold against his skin. He walked back to his truck without another word, jaw clenched tight. Rumors spread fast through the company. Someone claimed Tristan caused a hit and run accident downtown. It was a lie, but lies move faster than facts. Tristan showed up at his father's house that night, furious. A police officer actually called me about this, he said, pacing the kitchen floor. There's no accident. There's no case number. Nothing. They're trying to distract us, Darnell said. Make us waste time defending things that aren't even real. Tristan slammed his hand against the counter. How far will they go, Dad? Far enough to lose, Darnell answered quietly. Men like Beaumont always overreach eventually. Darnell felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. His knuckles turned pale. He forced them open again. He called Tristan every hour that day, checking his voice for signs of stress. His son insisted he was fine, but the strain showed through the phone line. Reporters camped outside the company's main gate, cameras ready. One shouted questions about missing funds as Darnell tried to walk past. He said nothing and kept his eyes forward. Inside the building, whispers followed him down every hallway. Some employees avoided his eyes entirely, afraid of picking the wrong side. One evening, a woman named Maggie Reyes knocked quietly on his truck window in the parking garage. The garage lights buzzed overhead, flickering in the damp air. She was 54, with kind eyes and gray streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. She worked as the company's senior accountant. I've seen things, she whispered. Money moving where it shouldn't. She handed him a small USB drive wrapped in a paper towel. $320,000, routed through shell accounts. All approved by Beaumont. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed it over. If they find out I gave you this, I'm finished here. 2 days later, Maggie called Darnell in a panic. Beaumont's assistant cornered me in the parking lot, she said, her voice shaking. Told me to forget what I saw, or I'd lose my pension. Darnell felt anger burn hot behind his ribs. Did they threaten you directly? Close enough, Maggie whispered. I am scared, Darnell. You're not alone in this, he said firmly. I'll make sure you're protected. He arranged for Marcus to drive Maggie to a safe hotel outside the city that same night. Old union friends stood watch outside her door in shifts. Would Maggie manage to hand off that evidence before Beaumont's people caught on? 2 nights later, at 11:45 p.m., rain hammered the old storage yard at Pier 14. Darnell and Tristan moved quietly between rusted shipping containers. Water dripped from broken gutters above, splashing loud against puddles below. Their flashlight beams cut thin lines through the darkness. The storage yard had not been used in years. Weeds pushed up through cracked concrete. The air smelled like rust and old salt water. You sure this place still has the records? Tristan whispered, pulling his jacket tighter against the cold. Marcus said everything from the early years got boxed up and left here, Darnell answered. Nobody thought to look. They needed the original founding charter, the one with real signatures from Blue Anchor's first investors. Tristan pushed the storage door. It swung open too easily. The lock's already cut, Tristan whispered. Darnell's chest tightened. Someone had been here first. A shuffling sound echoed from behind a stack of steel drums. Both men froze, barely breathing. Who had gotten here ahead of them, trying to destroy this priceless document? The smell of smoke hit them first, sharp and chemical. Then orange light flickered along the far wall. Fire! Tristan shouted. Flames climbed a shelf of old paper files fast, feeding on dust and dry wood. Black smoke rolled across the ceiling. A metal shelving unit groaned, then collapsed sideways, pinning Darnell's leg beneath it. Pain shot up from his ankle. Heat pressed against his face like an open oven door. Tristan grabbed a steel crowbar from the floor. His hand shook, but his grip held firm. "Dad, stay with me," he shouted over the roaring flames. He wedged the bar under the shelf and pushed with everything he had. Muscles burned. The metal screamed as it lifted an inch, then two. Darnell pulled his leg free just as sparks rained down around them. He grabbed a small rusted tin box from a nearby crate before crawling toward the exit. His left forearm scraped against burning debris, leaving a raw red mark. Outside, they collapsed onto wet gravel, coughing, gasping for clean air. Rain fell cold against their scorched skin, mixing with soot and sweat. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Red and blue lights soon painted the wet pavement in flashing color. Behind them, the storage building folded in on itself with a deep groan. Tristan grabbed his father's shoulders, checking him over frantically. "You're bleeding. Your arm, Dad, look at your arm." Darnell glanced down at the raw burn along his forearm. He barely felt it, through the adrenaline still pounding in his chest. "I'm alive," he said hoarsely. That's what matters right now. In that terrifying moment, Darnell understood something clearer than ever. His children mattered more than any company, any title, any fortune. But did the papers inside that tin box survive the fire at all? At 3:15 in the morning, a family doctor wrapped clean bandages around Darnell's burned arm. Tristan sat nearby, exhausted, his shirt streaked with soot. Carefully, Darnell opened the small tin box. The edges were scorched black, curling from the heat. Inside, the paper was singed at the corners, but the center text remained readable. Tristan leaned over his shoulder, holding his breath. The kitchen light hummed softly above them, the only sound in the quiet clinic. His eyes scanned down the page, until he found his own signature, faded but clear. His hand had been steadier back then, younger, full of hope for a company still small enough to fit in one warehouse. Below it sat a clause he had almost forgotten writing. He remembered now, dimly, sitting across from Marcus at a scarred wooden table years ago. Marcus had insisted on adding it, calling it insurance against greedy men. At the time, Darnell had laughed it off as unnecessary caution. If any party uses fraud or coercion to seize control of this company, it read, full operating authority transfers immediately to the Port Workers Union. Darnell's breath caught. Marcus had been right all along. Tristan pulled out his phone, scrolling fast. "Dad, remember those new security cameras Beaumont pushed the board to install last year? He called it modernizing our old sites." Darnell's eyes widened. Pier 14 was on that list. If those cameras were running, Tristan said, they caught whoever started that fire. Darnell felt a strange, grim satisfaction settle over him. Beaumont's own pride in his security system might become the very thing that exposed him. But how could they use this in court, while Beaumont kept Sarah trapped in fake legal proceedings? The morning of the trial arrived under heavy gray clouds over the Savannah River. News vans lined the street outside the courthouse. Reporters shouted questions, twisting the story into something ugly. One headline claimed Darnell stole company funds to raise a white daughter for personal image. Darnell gripped the steering wheel of his old Ford pickup. His jaw set tight as he drove through the crowd of cameras. Flashbulbs popped against his windshield like small explosions of white light. A reporter pressed close to his window, shouting about missing millions. Another asked if he felt guilty using a homeless child for good publicity. Darnell kept his eyes on the road ahead. His hand stayed steady on the wheel, even though his heart pounded hard against his ribs. He thought about Marcus's words from that quiet cabin. Be the anchor. Don't let the storm move you. At 9 o'clock, he stepped into the courthouse, his bandaged arm hidden beneath his worn suit jacket. His back stayed straight the whole way in. Marble steps stretched up toward tall glass doors. Federal marshals stood watch on either side, their faces blank and unreadable. Inside, the lobby echoed with footsteps and hushed voices. Darnell's boots clicked against polished stone, out of place among rows of expensive dress shoes. Could he really stand against the small army of lawyers Beaumont had hired from across the state? Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Wide glass windows showed the storm gathering low over the river outside. At 10:47, Beaumont stood confidently before the judge, holding up a signed agreement. "This proves Mr. Pierce voluntarily transferred his shares," he said smoothly. His lead attorney added that the document was dated 3 weeks earlier, notarized, and worth an estimated $411 million in transferred assets. The judge studied the paper, then looked toward Darnell. "This signature appears authentic, Mr. Pierce. Can you explain this?" Darnell's stomach dropped. The forgery looked almost perfect. His own attorney whispered that fighting the signature alone might not be enough. Sweat gathered at the back of Darnell's neck. He glanced toward the courtroom doors, praying silently for something, anything, to change the tide. Beaumont turned, a thin smile spreading across his face. "A lucky mechanic like you does not deserve to be chairman," he said, letting his laugh ring out across the room. The judge raised his gavel, preparing to freeze the trust fund permanently. For one long second, the whole courtroom went completely still. The air conditioning hummed low overhead. A clock on the far wall ticked, each second stretching longer than the last. Darnell's heartbeat pounded in his ears, drowning out everything else. He stared at the polished wood floor, bracing for the sound of the gavel striking down. Then the tall wooden doors at the back burst open. Every head turned. Serafina Pierce walked in wearing a sharp navy suit, carrying a thick folder against her chest. Her heels struck the floor with steady, unhurried rhythm. She stopped in the center aisle, calm as still water. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "I need to be heard." The judge blinked. "And you are?" "Serafina Pierce, Chief Legal Counsel for the Port Workers Union of Savannah." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Beaumont's smile cracked at the edges. He recovered quickly, straightening his silk tie. "This is a private family matter, Your Honor, not a legal one." "On the contrary," Serafina said, "it is entirely legal and entirely relevant to this case." The judge leaned forward, curiosity replacing his earlier boredom. "Continue, Ms. Pierce." 16 years ago, Serafina continued, "my father signed a protective clause into Blue Anchor's founding charter." She opened the folder and placed the document before the judge. "This trust fund was never a personal gift. It was structured as the union's emergency reserve fund under my legal guardianship." Beaumont's face lost color. "That's impossible. That document doesn't exist." Serafina turned to face him directly. "It survived a fire you likely paid someone to start, Mr. Beaumont." Gasps spread through the room. A court reporter's fingers froze above her keyboard. "The charter states," Serafina read aloud, "that any fraudulent attempt to seize company control instantly transfers full authority to the union." She looked up, her voice steady. "Your forged agreement, Mr. Beaumont, just triggered that exact clause." Beaumont's hands trembled slightly on the podium. "This is absurd. You have no proof of fraud." Serafina reached into her folder again. "I have an audio recording of you offering me $500,000 to stay silent." She pressed play on a small recorder. Beaumont's own voice filled the courtroom, clear and unmistakable. Color drained completely from his face. Sweat beaded along his hairline. His hands gripped the podium edge until his knuckles turned white. The judge's expression hardened. "Bailiff, please detain Mr. Beaumont for further questioning." 2 federal marshals stepped forward and placed handcuffs on Beaumont's wrists. Metal clicked shut with a sharp, final sound. "You can't do this," Beaumont shouted, his voice cracking. "I built half this company." Nobody answered him. The room stayed silent except for the low hum of the air conditioning and distant thunder outside. Darnell sat still, watching the man who tried to destroy his family get led away in chains. Serafina turned toward her father, her composed mask finally breaking. Tears welled in her eyes as she crossed the room to reach him. He stood and pulled her into a tight hug, right there in front of the stunned courtroom. Neither of them cared who was watching anymore. "You remembered," he whispered against her hair. "After everything, you still fought for this family." "You taught me how," she whispered back. The judge cleared his throat, though his own eyes looked suspiciously bright. Given the evidence presented, this court recognizes the union's legal authority over Blue Anchor Logistics, effective immediately. Applause broke out among the small crowd of dock workers who had come to watch. Someone near the back wiped their eyes with a rough sleeve. After the storm this legal earthquake caused, what would happen to the empire Beaumont once controlled? By late afternoon, the storm had finally passed. Golden light spread wide across the Savannah River, turning the water amber and gold. Darnell, Tristan, and Serafina walked together onto the old wooden pier, the same one from 16 years ago. Dozens of port workers gathered along the dock, cheering and clapping as the three of them approached. Someone rang an old ship bell. Darnell reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass key. Locker number 308. The metal door creaked open, hinges stiff from years of salt air. Inside sat no cash, no stock certificates, no legal papers at all. Just one faded photograph, slightly curled at the corners. It showed three people standing on this very pier. A tired young father, a small boy holding his hand, a shaking little girl in a torn coat, clutching a one-eyed teddy bear. Serafina's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the photo. "You kept it here this whole time?" "Every single day," Darnell said softly. "This locker was never about hiding money. It was about remembering what actually matters." She wrapped her arms around her father, pressing her face against his worn, grease-stained shoulder. Warm tears soaked into the old fabric. Tristan placed a hand on both their shoulders, saying nothing. Some moments do not need words. The union workers kept cheering behind them, their voices carrying out over the water. Someone started singing an old work song, low and rough, and others joined in. Frank pushed through the crowd, grinning wide beneath his silver stubble. "Knew you'd come out on top," he said, clapping Darnell on the back. Maggie stood near the edge of the group, smiling for the first time in weeks. Her job was safe now. Her courage had mattered. Marcus arrived last, leaning on his old wooden cane. He nodded once at Darnell, a small, satisfied gesture between two men who understood each other completely. "Told you," Marcus said. "You just needed to remember who you were." Darnell laughed, a real laugh, the first one in months. It felt like something heavy finally lifting off his chest. Charles Beaumont would face federal charges for fraud and bribery. Blue Anchor Logistics would rebuild under new leadership, guided by the people who loved it most. Not executives in glass towers. Not men chasing profit above people. Just a mechanic, his children, and a promise made 16 years ago under a stormy Savannah sky. A promise that said no one would ever push this family out to sea alone again. The sun dipped lower, painting the water in deep orange and violet. Waves lapped gently against the old pier posts, steady and calm. Dignity had outlasted greed. Love had outlasted every lie built to destroy it. Months later, Blue Anchor Logistics reopened Pier 14 with a small ceremony. Workers hung a new bronze plaque near the entrance, engraved with simple words about loyalty and family. Serafina now led the company's legal division full-time, working alongside her father instead of fighting for him in court. Tristan took over daily operations, learning the business from the ground up, just like his father once had. Darnell still showed up to the docks most mornings, wrench in hand, sandwich in his jacket pocket. Some habits, he decided, were worth keeping forever. And on that quiet dock, three people stood together, finally fully home.